The economic crisis and neo-Fordist or neoliberal restructuring that occurred following this initial urbanization and growth of World War II began in the early 1970s, right around the time of the Arab-Israeli War, which led to an oil embargo by OPEC. This led to the combined economic crises of stagflation and a recession. What this refers to is where there's falling demand of goods as well as rising inflation prices over this decade. So we begin to see rapid unemployment occurring in the United States, as shown here by the numbers, as well as an average weekly fall in wages when we take into account the inflation of the cost of being able to buy durable goods. What we can begin to see is how oil here impacted this specific time period, and we can look at the transition of the history of energy consumption within the United States as it relates to urbanization and the economy. So before 1985, we can see that there was a large use of actually primary resource or wood for heating and for industry and or use in the United States. This is when we have largely an agrarian or farm-based society with few major cities. So there's not a high reliance on energy consumption from the industry base since we're a farm-based society. From 1985 through 1940, we could see this as the industrialization period and the rapid period of early urbanization in the United States. When the United States transitioned, as many major westernized countries did at this period of time, of transitioning from being an agrarian-based country to an industrial or urbanized-based country. We can see that coal production, especially in this early industrial period, peaked in 1910 with a high peak of consumption around 80%. This is the height of the Industrial Revolution, where if you went into many of the cities in the eastern United States, like Pittsburgh or New York, there would be black soot smoke clouding the skylines and inability to see. Phoenix, Tucson, and Arizona missed much of this because their urbanization did not occur till much later, until after World War II. What we can begin to see is after 1910 that increasingly natural gas and oil was being substituted for coal. And so we see the demise or the downturn of coal, which has continued to go down, and the rise of oil and natural gas. If we move this to the present, we'll begin to see renewable energies starting to expand their base and take over larger portions of this because it was simply becoming too expensive to extract coal. But we also see somewhat more of a balance in the oil industry due to the ability for the United States to draw on fracking or taking oil out of shale in the United States and less of a dependence on OPEC, which was one of the major crises that occurred in the 1970s. So after 1990, oil represented about 40%, with some regions of the United States having a greater dependence on oil than others. Transportation, especially the large American cars, but also the trucking industry of being able, semi-trucks moving goods and products to market, took up 2/3 of that consumption. Neoliberal restructuring that occurred in the 1970s through the 1980s was responsible for a massive amount of deindustrialization and loss of jobs. This is highlighted in a figure in your book, this table, that shows that the losers were the manufacturing belts, the older industries, where the winners were the Sun Belt. We see at the same time a decline of federal regulations over the US economy. This is where federal oversight, or about 1/3 of it, was withdrawn from urban-related funding. So the urban areas suffered even more greatly In this map, we can see the index scores of the most distressed and the least distressed areas of the country. So you can see that northeastern hub of the old manufacturing belt experiencing much of the distress. In Arizona, it's interesting to note that the southern portions near the border, which are not as well developed in terms of newer cities, like Tucson is a much older city than Phoenix, getting more distress during this period of time than Phoenix, which is a newer city. At the same time, we see an overaccumulation crisis where there's surplus labor that's being laid off in areas and also surplus money or capital that's being idle and not being productive. So the circuits of capital investment, sort of the temporary fix of moving investment from primary to secondary and tertiary circuits, begins to occur. And what we mean by this is, if we think of the primary circuit of the economy, is industrial production. We're applying labor and machines to produce commodities. The secondary circuit of the economy is fixed capital in production of consumption processes, especially as it's related to real estate, something that's fixed over time. The tertiary sector of the economy is related to science, technology, education, health, and welfare programs.